an average person can look like a genius when they're in a good position. And positioning is largely, not always, but largely within our control. And there's always something that we can do today to improve our position tomorrow. And there's a difference between positioning and predicting. Predicting is, I know I'm going to apply for this job next week, or I know I'm going to have a test next week. And predicting is like a subset of positioning, when I actually know what the future looks like. I'm not guessing what the future looks like. I know what the future looks like.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the distinct privilege of welcoming a true luminary in the world of clear thinking and continuous learning. Our guest is none other than Shane Parrish. He's the mastermind behind the widely acclaimed Farnam Street, which itself is a platform dedicated to mastering the best of what other people already have figured out. But it's not just him as a thought leader. He's like a navigator in the vast ocean of knowledge, helping us to try and clear steer of the cognitive errors of our lives. His contribution is enormous, but also amazing with his new book, Clear Thinking. He's like a guiding light to people who are trying to be smarter in the world. So his journey is fascinating even from his early days, where he was experiencing challenges and the opportunities of frequent relocations as a child, to his thought-provoking career transitions. Shane's life is a testament to the power of curiosity and lifelong learning. At Farnam Street, Shane doesn't just share knowledge, he cultivates, let's say, worldly wisdom. He challenges us to think deeper, question our biases, and embrace the complexities of this world. He's a beacon for people who want to be thoughtful in their decision-making and in their effective leadership. So with that, Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for the incredibly generous introduction, Craig.
Well, it's deserved, and I want to just dig into some of this journey. Let's start with your early years. You were, I think, maybe 8 years old, 9. I don't know. You'll correct me. And school was not so enjoyable. But then you had a moment in the library where you came across a book. Is the Watch Stop Gang? Am I saying that right? Tell us about what that is and why it mattered so much.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't speak to other people's childhoods, but my childhood was a bit rough, especially when it came to school and academics. And I never, for whatever reason, I just didn't fit in a classroom. And I was bored and, reasonably intelligent. So I would start getting into mischief over and over again. Maybe it's a cry for attention. Who knows? I mean, those are questions
like
to
what?
be.
Like what kind of mischief would you get into?
Reorganizing books, vandalism, deleting stuff from computers, just, petty mischief that, you get into when you're sort of 13, going out on my dirt bike with my friends. And, so in grade 7, I had skipped school for 7 weeks. And then I decided to go live with my
Hold on, you
biological.
skipped school for 7 weeks.
Yeah, this is back when, you used to have those answering machines that still had cassettes in them. So I used to erase the school message every day. I mean, I set it up, right? Like when I said reasonably intelligent, I was like, "Oh, we're going to Florida for a month. Like we'll be back in a bit." And this is like the teachers didn't really ask questions back then. And so they started calling when the month was up, and they call every day, and I just delete the message. And, I would go
Wow.
outside and pretend to walk to school, and my parents would leave for work. And then I'd go back to my treehouse and I'd eat eggs. I'd make myself eggs during the day. And that's sort of what I would live off of. And they wondered where all the eggs were. But I was like, oh, when I get home from school, I was just eating all these eggs. And then eventually, the school principal, I think, came and knocked on my door one night. And I was like, oh, this gig is up. And I thought it was funny, in terms of I just didn't want to go to school. I didn't like the classroom. And as a condition of sort of not being expelled, I had to go see a child psychologist. And she's like, there's nothing wrong with him. He's just bored, which was good. And then I decided to go live with my biological father in grade 8 because I thought a fresh start might offer different advantages, and it didn't end up working out that way. And so I
Hmm.
fell in with the wrong crowd in grade 8. Grade 7 I was sort of on my own getting in trouble. In grade 8 I was encouraged by the people I was hanging around to get into trouble. And I
Hmm.
remember, it was increasingly, it was getting worse and worse, right? Like I was on a path to really no good. And,
Hmm.
I hadn't crossed that line, as if there's a line, but I hadn't really crossed the line. And then, one night, well, during the day, we had went to the library and we had to do this book report. And I hate book reports.
Hmm.
I hated school. I hated everything about school. I hated somebody telling
Hmm.
me what to read. I hated somebody telling me what to do. I hated somebody
Hmm.
having a subjective opinion about my thoughts and whether they were right or not.
Hmm.
And just a really troubled childhood in that sense. Anyways, so I ended up in this true crime section of my grade 8 library, which had two books. One was called The Stopwatch Gang, and I was like, this one looks interesting. I just randomly picked it up off the shelf, started reading the first page, and it's about these bank robbers. I was like, oh my god, this is my kind of book. This is awesome. So I get home that night and I start reading the book, and I get halfway through it, and then the next night I'm reading it again because I can't put it down. I'm like, oh man, how did these guys work? Like, and I start trying to figure out, like, how do they pull this off? And,
Hmm.
what does it take? And, how do the cops catch them? And it became this like
Hmm.
real life sort of, I don't know, it was a true story, and it was so captivating, and I was so into it.
Hmm.
And my friends showed up at my door on the second night. And I'm like one chapter away from finishing, and they're like, "Come on!" They're on their dirt bikes. We live in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, "No, I'm not feeling well. I'm not coming out tonight." But I really just wanted to read this last chapter, and I knew if I went out, I wasn't going to read that last chapter. And I was just so pulled into this book. Anyway, they went out that night. They broke into somebody's house, which we had never done before, and I would have been with them. I doubt I would have gone in, but I definitely would have been there. And I'll skip over the bad part, but it happened to be a cop's house, and their lives changed in that
Sorry,
moment.
what do you mean? What do you mean you skipped over the bad part? This feels like
Well,
kind of the bad thing, but
yeah, I mean, they got caught. There's a lot of trouble, a lot of drama. The cop came home, saw flashlights in his house, called it in, and went in. And their lives changed. They never returned to school, and so, in the blink of an eye, through
they never returned to
sheer
school.
sheer luck, sheer luck, we'll never return to school that year,
Yeah, no, but I
and through
understand.
yeah, and so through sheer luck, I ended up staying at home. And then, I went to the school the next day and I'm like, whoa, where are they? What happened? And, sort of like went to their house and I got no answer. And then, eventually it just came out that they're not coming back to school this year. And then it came out that they sort of, went to juvenile detention, or, whatever the consequences were for them at the time. And I just got scared straight. Like, I don't know if that term makes sense to everybody, but I was like, man, I could have been there. And this was a coin flip, 50%. Like, I could have gone either way. And I felt bad because maybe had I been there, I could have warned them and they would have gotten less trouble, or, and alternatively, I
Mhm.
also was like, oh man, like my life just flashed before my eyes in a very
Mhm.
different way because of this book. Right. And I was pulled into
Right,
this world, and that was the sort of thing.
right.
And so after that, I was never a problem in anything. I mean, I was mischievous a little bit, but like not like I was before. And so in grade 9, I went back to living with my mom and my dad, and um, I found computers in grade 9, and computers. My grades did not improve in school, but because I was sleeping in school most of the time, I would stay up all night playing on my computer, programming my
Hmm.
computer, and then I would
Hmm.
go in the next day and try to finagle my way through school. And yeah, it just definitely changed my path. And we all have these random moments where one choice, and it's not even a choice. So it could be luck, it could be thoughtful, it could be sort of conscious, and you'd be just in a completely different situation than you are right now. And I'm cognizant of that, and sort of I escaped through this fiction, well, non-fictional world in this case, and that's how I survived the rest of grade 8. I just actually read books I wanted to read, not the books the school was telling me to read. My grades did not improve. I was a straight D student all the way until grade 10. uh, yeah.
There's so many places to go with that, but well, one place to go is just is how did you go from that description to being a spy for the Canadian government. I mean, that's
Yeah.
quite a shift. Other than there's like a golden thread through everything you've just shared, which is sort of, how would you describe it? Like kind of low key nefarious, like wanting to. I mean, that's 7 weeks you're away from school. That's more than just, oh, I took off for a day. There was strategy to that deception. There was, and I don't mean to make more of it than it is either, but there's something there. So, was that the theme that continued?
Well,
Connect the
there
dots
has
here.
to. It's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I mean, there's definitely an angle to people who think outside the box and think differently, and have to look at a situation and see different things in that situation. And I get to work with a whole bunch of people like that who saw systems as puzzles, and the puzzle was, how do we get what we want out of that system, and then can we arrange it so that it happens? And whether you wanted to skip school or do good in the world, it is a system that we operate in, and understanding the system we operate in, its limitations and its strengths, can have certain advantages and disadvantages, right? There's not all pros to it. But how did I end up there? I
Well,
started
actually, I want to kind of go back there. So you said that your grades changed when?
grade 10.
What changed in grade 10? Do you know what changed?
Yeah, so I switched schools every year until grade 10. So grade 10 and 11 were the first 2 years I went to the
Good
same
grief.
school 2
That's a
years
lot.
in a
That's a
row.
lot of schools. That's a
Yeah,
lot
it
of
is.
disruption.
But I knew in grade 10 I had moved from grade 9 to grade 10, different provinces. And I knew in grade 10 I had a good shot at being in high school for 3 years together. And I decided,
Mm,
like, I'm good at making friends. I mean, byproduct of moving so often is I can walk up to people, I can talk to them, and I can fit in with almost anybody. I can fit in with the jocks, I can fit in with the nerds, I can fit in with the and so I decided, I was going to join a sports team. And that was a good way to meet people. So I'd show up for football practice on day one, and
mm.
they're running around the field, and I'm like, this does not look like a lot of fun. But the guy's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, that guy over there is like throwing a football, and he doesn't look like to be working so hard. So I'm like, I just point over there. I don't say anything. The guy's like, oh, you want to be a quarterback? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And so, I had never thrown a football on a team before or anything. That first year was a bit of a disaster. I got the nickname third string because I definitely did not
Mhm.
see the field the first year. And anyways, I ended up talking to somebody after practice who became my best friend in high school. And his father and my grade 11 English teacher are probably the two people more than anybody who in high school changed my trajectory for the positive. And I remember two distinct moments. One in grade 10, it's sort of October, and I go over to my friend's house. His name was Scott, and I go over to his house, and his dad sort of pulls me aside after dinner, because at dinner we were talking about university and like what I wanted to be. And I was like, I don't even, like, what is university? Like, I don't, that's not a word that
Mhm.
we use in my house. I don't know
Mhm.
what that means. It sounds expensive, right? Like, it sounds like it costs money. And,
Wow.
we can't really afford that. And, I'm just having this very different conversation. He pulls me aside, and I don't know if he remembers this, but he was a very stern and straightforward man, and not
Mm.
somebody you wanted to be on the wrong side of. And he did this very tactfully too. He waited for his son to like go to the bathroom, and he sort of like nudges me outside, and he's like, "Look, I don't know where you come from. I don't know where you're going, but if you're not going to university, you're not hanging around my son." And I was
Wow.
like, I don't even know what university is. Like, it sounds good, but he's like, I'll help you. But that has to be the path you're on. And that means good grade. And he like laid out pretty much like what that means.
Wow.
And his son, became my best friend. And it was okay to be smart all of a sudden. When you're hanging around bad kids, and you start hanging around good kids, you adopt the behaviors of the people you're around. And it was okay to do good in school. It wasn't uncool
Wow.
anymore. And so I ended up doing pretty decent in high school, I would say. I didn't do homework, so I got 0 out of 10 in most classes on homework. but I still got high 80s in my grades, so it was good. And I worked full time for most of high school to pay for university because, like, Mr. Corkery sort of instilled in me that if I want to go to university, um, that I would have to do that. And so I started working 30 hours a week, and I would close up the store, and that was my means of saving money so I could go to university. And then I
So
wanted to
what?
take computer science because that's what I did every night. I love playing on computers. I love programming. I love that I could connect to other computers. And, you can imagine all the mischief that I would get up to when I could connect to other computers and play around with
Mhm.
things back in the 90s, right? Um, back before that sort of got a bad name to it.
It's another extension of this theme that's come out of the conversation earlier. These inflection points. I mean, you're subscribing it to luck, or it could be luck, but the meeting of that particular friend, the conversation that his dad has with you, but for the fear of God go I, like this, how different life would have been even at that point without that intervention.
100%. And then there's another moment that probably actually got me my job, which, it took 3 years to sort of play out. But first year university, I had to take a physics class, and I didn't have time to do the assignments. And to put things in context, each assignment was unique to each student.
Hmm,
So no two students had the same assignment. There was 10 versions of question one, and each version of question one had different numbers.
hmm.
And so no two assignments were exactly alike. And you had to log in and submit your results over Telnet. For anybody who remembers what that is, you basically have to, like, enter the right answer and then go on to the next question. And these assignments took like 20 hours to figure out. They were for physics majors. They were not for computer science majors. This was like a serious
Wow.
physics class.
No, that is
And
impressive.
all the kids in my class used to hire the same two tutors, and these tutors had a spreadsheet, and they basically looked at what version of the test you had, entered your numbers, and spat out the results. People would take those results, and for 20 or $50 or whatever it was at the time, they would be done their assignment in a matter of minutes.
Wow.
And I couldn't afford this tutor, and since nobody else had my question,
So by
I
tutor,
had
you don't really mean tutor. You mean just someone who did the work for them.
I'm using a very kind word in this situation. Yeah. And so I
Yeah.
was like, oh, well, how do I solve this problem? So I remember spending a night on the computer, the physics website, the school's website, and I read every rule there was to read about submission of assignments and
Hmm.
electronics and sort of, and nowhere did it say that I had to enter my numbers uh, manually. So I wrote a little program, and this program guessed negative 100,000 to positive 100,000 in increments of point 0.1, because that was the margin of error. And so I just ran this program at night, and I would wake up in the morning and I would have 100 on my assignment. It would just guess. There was no limit to the number of guesses that you could have on this question. So it wouldn't even read the physics
Wow.
questions. It wouldn't even read my variables. It would just literally guess the answers. And anyways, come in March, and he shows this little presentation, and on the bottom is your student number. So on the x-axis is your student number, on the y-axis is number of guesses, and the average guess number of attempts per assignment was, I don't know, like 8 or 12. And then there's one student who like broke the chart several times, and he's like, I would like to see the student in my office after the class. And so I
Wow.
show up at it. Everybody's like, what the heck? And I was like, oh, this is like, oh God, I'm probably in some sort of trouble. And so I show up at his office, and I'm like, hey, it's me. And he's like, yeah, so I'm going to give you 0 on your assignments. And I'm like, whoa, what do you mean 0? Like, that doesn't make sense. And he's like, well, you violated the rules. And I was like, no, I have a copy of all the rules at home. And he pulls up his website and he shows me, and I was like, that was not there. You just added that. Like,
Hmm.
that's not fair. Going forward, I won't do this. I can't afford to do what all the other kids are doing. And I didn't rat anybody out, but I just said, like, I can't afford to do whatever everybody else is doing. And I'm working 40 hours a week while trying to come to this class. And basically like a sob story. And he didn't buy it. He gave me a 0 on that. I ended up failing physics because he gave me a 0 on my assignments. And so long story short, to
Hmm.
bring this full circle to how I got my job, when I'm doing my interviews to get the job, they talk to everybody. They talk to they ended up talking to him, and he finds me in the hallway and he says, I'm sorry, this is still coming back to bite you. You're probably not going to get your job. I had to be honest with them. And I just remember looking at him and I'm like, I'm really glad you were honest with them because that's why I did get my job. I didn't violate any rules and I thought outside the box about how to solve a problem. And that's what they want people to do at intelligence agencies. And,
Hmm.
I thought that that was a good way to sort of bring that full circle, right? Where he taught me a really good lesson. And at the same time, that lesson came back to be a positive thing in the future.
How long how long were you working for the intelligence agency?
Can I just preface this with like I had the best job in the world, right? Like I
Yes,
started
that's a great preface.
2 weeks before September 11th. I get to work
Oh my
with
goodness.
some of the most insanely talented unsung heroes in the world for 15 years.
Hmm.
People who got no recognition for what they did, people who sacrificed countless hours, who spent more time at work than with their family, especially in the wake of September 11th, and insanely, insanely talented, amazing group of people who I still love to this day. And so I worked there about 15 years.
Can you give me just a tiny but concrete example of something someone did that makes you preface it like that?
No, not without going to jail. I don't.
Mhm.
I don't want to walk any lines here. I loved working.
Give me this sense then. So you mean people on the front lines of action? You don't mean the or do you give me more,
Well,
something more.
I worked for the Canadian version of NSA, or if you're listening in the UK, GCHQ, and so we worked in concert with uh, agencies around the world. The choices that we made through what we were doing affected our country and other countries and troops in theater. I was never brave enough to sort of like pick up a gun and be on the front lines. And I did have a huge sense of patriotism growing up with two parents who were in the military full time and,
Mm,
and dedicated
mm,
their life to service,
mm,
and a grandparent who fought in wars. I was lucky to be born into a country like Canada, and I do feel, and I still feel that there's an obligation to give back and to make Canada the best that I can make it. And I just choose to do that in a different way today. But for 15 years, I literally dedicated my life to my craft.
mm. What else do you want to share about that period? You're saying sort of that's the preface. What's the what's the main course?
When I left, what do you mean?
Well, just is there anything else that you can share about that experience, that 15 years? It's a major part of your journey. How did you go from there, let's say, to the Knowledge Project?
Well, so when you start working at an intelligence agency, you end up with problems that you've never encountered before, that there's no solution before, that you
Mm,
can't Google. And what I loved about it is you can't
right.
you can't ever not play the game, if that makes sense. And I use the word the game, but like don't take it too seriously. You can't opt out of this. You have to play, and you're
Mm,
competing in a global market similar to business where people have better talent than you in some cases, more money than you in some cases, and more resources in some cases.
mhm,
And you can't complain about that. You just have to deal with the hand that you have, the best of your ability, and find a way to compete. And for anybody interested in those type of problems, intelligence agencies are like the place to be. But the flip side of that is, I dedicated 15 years to that, and I ended up getting divorced and deciding I didn't want to spend my life at an intelligence agency anymore, and I wanted to do my own thing. I wasn't quite sure what that thing was in the moment. I just knew there's a saying in the military that the uniform doesn't fit anymore, and it basically means the military is not going to change. And so if you're expecting it to change, then you're going to have a problem. And so there's that
Mhm.
little
The
thing. I think it
system
was
the system's bigger than you.
yeah, I think it was Steve Jobs who said, "Hey, if you wake up on a Monday and you don't want to go to work, that's fine. But if you do that too many Mondays in a row, like you can waste your life." And I just woke up a few Mondays in a row, and I was like, "This isn't. I'm done. I need to find something else." And
This
so,
this isn't healthy,
yeah, well, it wasn't healthy for me. It's not what I
right?
wanted. And it was for a long time, and that's awesome. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be unhappy going to work every day and trying to figure this out. And
So
so, oh,
no, I want to hear that what you're going there, but I've got sort of things in my head now. One is I have this kind of image of you when you say game. It gives me the idea of Ender's Game, and I can kind of imagine you now as is it Andrew Ender? Is it Wiggins? Gosh, it's a while
yes,
since I.
sir. Yeah,
But
yeah.
but I sort of imagine you as Ender uh, in that game that must be played. You
I would be more like Ender's assistant, maybe. I, I
sure,
was I
but
was
still,
super lucky. I ended up, working with probably just through luck again, like a lot of moments of luck in life. But I ended up working with the I would say one of the top three people in the world at the craft that I was in. And that had ups and downs. And if you read my book, you can find some interesting stories about some of the
yep,
downs. And he,
right.
he's one of the most brilliant people I have ever met in my life. And to put things in context, he's the person that everybody calls when they can't solve a problem. Even to this day, even though he runs a cyber defense company now called Field Effect, he was and is sort of the Michael Jordan, the Kobe Bryant, the whatever you want to call them of that
The ender.
field, the ender. He was the ender. Yeah.
So he's this leader with a very particular set of skills that
Yes.
allows him to be extremely useful, extremely valuable in the most complex no-win situations.
Yeah.
But his obsession, his his level of um, really, in some ways, his level of competence and commitment has an unintended consequence on your life and your experience.
Well, his standards were
Right.
definitely higher than the standards I had for myself when I arrived. And, one thing that I find really interesting is that the very best people in the world, one thing that they all have in common, and, you and I have spoken to a lot of them, is they tend to have extremely high standards of themselves, and they have extremely high standards of the people that work with them. And it can be a shock for people like myself coming in and yeah, there's quite a contrast between, when I started and when I didn't. And, when somebody tells you there's no excuses and you have to do your job, and it doesn't matter that the bus is late, it doesn't matter that you don't know how to do it, it doesn't matter that none of your excuses just matter. And, they hold you to a higher standard, and that standard raises where you're at. And you can run away from it or you can embrace it. I remember walking out of a meeting with him once, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, most people just avoid him. Don't worry about it." And he had basically called me out in this meeting and made me look like an idiot. Like I had tried to explain how something worked, and he just stood up and like really explained it. And I was like, "Oh." And then this guy, comes and he's like, "Yeah, most people just avoid him. Don't worry about it. It happens to all of us." And I was like, "Avoid him?" And I remember pausing in the hallway. I'm like, I want to be around. I want to work with this guy. I want to be around him. Like, are you kidding? Like, he's clearly brilliant. I can learn so much from being there. And so I guess how you interpret being around people who are exceptional has a huge impact on where you go. And I was like, "Oh no, man. Like I ended up spending more time with him than, my girlfriend at the time." And, uh, it was just a great learning experience about learning not only the craft that I was involved in, but learning the standards of excellence that are needed to be at the highest level in the game.
Now, you said earlier on, and I don't want to delve if you'd rather not, but you said, okay, so I ended up at the end of this 15 years. I'm divorced. Are those related? Do you see the obsession of the work that you were being required to do at this crazy level
Totally.
of expectation, no excuses? This is your whole life. Is that connected? I see you nodding. So, do
Yeah.
you have thoughts on that?
I mean, how could it not be connected? For 8 years, I basically spent 16 hours a day at work, 6 days a week. All the time that I could have been investing in my relationship, I was at work. And so, we all go through inevitable ups and downs in relationships. And, I was in a bad position when we went through a down. And I think that definitely was part of my contribution to my marriage not working out. And hopefully, this
Mm.
can become, hopefully, my hindsight can become somebody else's foresight,
Well,
uh,
just
and make
so.
and make their relationship better. And so, if you think about it in terms of positioning, which is something I talk about in clear thinking, it's, if you water the grass in your relationship every day and you invest in it, and, you make sure that you're connecting and you're close with your partner and you're spending time together, then you're still, it doesn't mean you're not going to have these stupid arguments from time to time, or disagreements, or that something's not going to come and get between you. But it does make a huge difference in how you handle those moments, and the ease at which you handle them. And watering the grass is such an apt phrase, because if we water the grass, what happens? It never goes dry. And if a spark goes on wet grass, it just goes out. But if we don't water the grass goes really dry, and a spark can start a raging fire. And I think of it in terms of positioning, right? And how do you position yourself to invest in your relationship? And how do you position yourself with your partner, so that you're building something together that it's going to survive these ups and downs?
That's a beautiful way to wrap part one of this interview. Um, this theme, it runs like a golden thread, how we can learn the best of what others know. That's a theme that continues as we move into this second part of the conversation about the journey to Farnam Street, to the Knowledge Project, and to the Clear Thinking book. For everybody listening, what is one thing that you have heard in the conversation so far that stands out to you? What is one thing that you can do differently as a result of this conversation? And who is somebody that you can share that with so that the conversation can continue now that this part of our conversation is over? Welcome back, everybody. This is part two of an extraordinary conversation with an extraordinary individual. We're here with Shane Parrish, who is more devoted to bringing knowledge to others than perhaps anyone I know. I mean, certainly up there with the very top echelon of people who don't just want to share insight and knowledge, but have built an institution, let's say, in doing that. Um, as we get into this conversation now, Shane, I want you to talk about, look, how did you get to the Knowledge Project, to Farnam Street, and from there to Clear Thinking, this marvelous new book that you've published?
So I started a blog, not a business, but a blog. I don't know, 2008, 2009, while I was still working for the intelligence agency, and I wasn't allowed a public profile. You couldn't Google me. I mean, that would have got me in so much trouble. So I
Hmm.
created an anonymous website, and I didn't want other people to read it. So I called it 68131 1440.blogger.com, which, don't go to that
Hmm.
website today. Somebody stole it. I've like relinquished this, but I talk about it a lot. So if
That's too
somebody
bad. That's a little
grabs a
sad.
domain, and the reason is that's the zip code for Berkshire Hathaway and the unit number at Hewitt Plaza. And I thought nobody would type in a series of digits. And what I
Hmm.
was really trying to do, going back to sort of the game, was how do I become the best in the world at what I do, or at least better than where I am? And how do I take outside ideas and apply them in the context of my environment? And so I was reading a lot about Daniel Kahneman and decision making because I was ended up, making decisions that affected my team and my country and other countries and troops in theater. And uh, so I wanted to get better at these types of decisions and just better at decision making. But there's no class called Decision Making 101. Nobody teaches you how to make decisions. And so I just started studying it on my own as a means to get better at it.
Hmm.
And I was reflecting on what I was learning, and my reflections were sort of encapsulated in this blog, which has become fs.blog today. And I was reflecting on what I was learning. I was writing notes. I was erasing things. I was connecting different ideas. I was trying to learn why some people are consistently able to make better decisions than other people. And if it was controllable and if there was something I could learn from that. And those are a lot of ifs, right? So some people are clearly better at making decisions than other people. Is that an IQ thing, or is there something that they inherently bring to the table? So I started with cognitive biases. I did all the MBA coursework. I dove into this like head first and sort of started writing about it. And again, it was just for me. And then I sort of 2 years later, I woke up and I'm like, oh, this RSS thing says like there's 10 or 12,000 people reading my blog. And then all of a sudden there's 25,000. And then, my boss walks into my office one day and he hands me an article and he's like, you should read this. It's good. And I look down and I'm like, oh shit, I wrote that. And I'm
that's a
like,
that's a moment there. That's a moment.
oh my God, this is crazy. Like,
But he
what
doesn't
is going
know.
on here?
But he doesn't know it's you because, of course, it's all anonymous, as you say. But something that's a moment where the universe is connecting. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
totally.
quite a moment.
And then on top of that, like, this is like 2014-ish. I'm starting to meet people who read the blog and they're
Mm.
asking me what I do for a living. And I'm like,
Mm,
what,
ah.
what do I say? I don't want to lie to people, but I clearly can't tell them the truth. And, all these worlds started colliding. And, that was a big reason where I was like, oh, I'm eventually going to have to like release my name here and sort of come.
Mhm.
I don't like lying to people, and I don't like sort of not telling people who become really good friends of mine. I felt like I was keeping a big secret from them.
For
And
sure. Well, you
obviously
were.
had to. I had to, but
But it
that's
doesn't
that's
make
not
but
the
you still had cognitive dissonance about it, and you're
yeah.
like, these paths are going to diverge more and more.
And so when I left, I was like, oh, I can change the name of the website. I can make it easier to read. I can do all these things. And, the Knowledge Project started in 2015. I think I did the first episode in 2015. And, that was after I had dinner with a CEO in New York of a public company. And, we had a private dinner and it was just a chat between us. And I remember walking away from that feeling really guilty. And
Mm,
I was walking back to my hotel and I was like, why do I feel guilty? I started like probing my brain, which is what I
sure,
tend to do. And I felt guilty because I was getting benefits out of this platform that I couldn't share with other people, and I didn't feel like that was fair. So I wanted a way to give back to other people because I believe in equal opportunity, not necessarily equal outcome. But here
sure,
I am gaining insight and this advantage that I really want to share with other people. And I think that was the moment I was like, oh, why don't I just, for the most part, try to record these conversations and share them with other people, because it's so cool to be able to call up almost anybody in the world and say, hey, will you come talk to me? And they say yes. And a lot of people can't do that. And a lot of people don't have the confidence to even ask. But I have, the confidence to ask. And, I get rejected all the time, but I keep asking. And sometimes it takes a few years, but I usually get the people that I want. And I record them and I like sharing them with people. And I really, I feel like I'm contributing to making the world a better place. And I'm a huge proponent of trying to leave the world a better place and help other people become the best version of themselves. And then it all, really blew up. And I think it was 2017 or 2018 when the New York Times decided to out me as I don't even know what you want to call it. They used the word spy in their headline, but,
yep.
they wanted to
That's a good
draw.
headline. It's a good headline for you.
Yeah, it was
Carry
the
on.
top article of the New York Times for like 3 days.
Wow.
And I think the best, the yeah.
Go on. No, go on. What was that thought?
Oh, I think it was the highest performing article that Landon Thomas, who was the author of that article, who had ever written. But I didn't want the
Mm,
profile, which was also a bit antithesis to the New York Times. And they're like, when it came out that they were writing a profile on me, I was like, oh, I don't want the attention. I don't want anything about my career in the public or my past, or, I don't want my kids reading this.
too, and now it's too late.
Well, journalistic integrity, they're like, you can't really decide that, but if you want to talk to us, then, that'll give us some other stuff. Because he had done a lot of research. I'll give him a lot of credit. He had talked to a lot of people, and,
Mm,
he had my old job titles and stuff like that in there. And I
mm,
was like, yeah, can we just like keep that stuff out? Like, that
mhm,
serves no public good, and it
mhm.
only causes problems for us, right? So he agreed to, and I met with him, and he's like, I don't know why everybody, what did he say in the article? I look like a grad student. I don't know why I don't know why everybody on Wall Street wants to talk to this guy, and
Well,
that
yeah,
really,
one of the headlines in that article is that 80% of the people that were reading your blog at the time were working on Wall Street. And the idea
yeah,
there, I mean, that was to your surprise, but the idea was, well, these people fit a certain archetype. They want that 1% edge that allow
yeah,
because there's a certain point of life in, I think, in any industry actually, and in any sphere of life where you've done the basics, right? So you're working, of course you're putting in effort. Okay, so that's not the issue. Of course you're motivated, because that's not the issue. So if you want to improve from there, you have to improve the way you think.
yeah.
And every percent of improvement in your thinking ability has this disproportionate impact for good. So it's a few things that put you in a position where suddenly this is very relevant information. And that seemed to be what was happening with these Wall Street types.
Yeah, so high leverage decision makers, right? Where 1% can
High
make a
leverage
huge
decision
difference.
makers.
Yeah, 1%
Yep.
makes a difference, in some
Yep.
cases, billions of dollars. Our three main
Yep.
audiences are all highly leveraged people. So we have professional sports, we have Wall Street, and we have Silicon Valley. And, those tend to be the three big buckets of Farnam Street readers and
It is.
listeners. And increasingly, it's going a bit more mainstream, which I love to see. But yeah, the New York Times thing really blew us up, and that was the impetus for the book. And
Mm-hmm.
but I never wanted the article. I never wanted the attention. And The Office got it framed for me. This is indicative of who I am. The Office got this article framed. They put it in this big, really heavy frame, and put it on the wall. And I remember, and I came in, and I taped. I printed out a comment by JGB, I think it was, from Portland, Oregon, who had commented on that New York Times article. Uh,
Mm,
and his comment said, I am highly confident that Mr. Parrish is enjoying his 15 minutes of fame. And I
mm.
taped that comment to the picture.
Is it still
Uh,
on there? Is the comment
well,
still
the
on?
picture came down, but the comment was on there for years. Yeah. But
Mm.
it's no longer even on the wall. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear
yeah,
you. Okay, so just for those of us, for those of the, for listeners right now who don't know the connection to the term Farnam Street at all, like
yeah,
why Farnam Street? Because this is
yeah.
such an important foundational piece for why someone should read your blog, why they should read this new book, right? Like it's a certain challenge. Go ahead.
So remember, going back, the original website was 68131. That was the zip
Right.
code for Berkshire Hathaway. And the street that Warren Buffett's house and also Berkshire Hathaway headquarters is on is Farnam Street. And so the name came from the street in Omaha, Nebraska, where Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger created Berkshire Hathaway, which is one of the entities that I spent a lot of time studying when I was trying to figure out how some people are just consistently better at making decisions than other people. And it was an homage to those two and all that I've learned from them, not only about business but also about life. And
Mm,
they indirectly, they had a huge impact on intelligence agencies around the world, and they have no idea. But taking their lessons and applying them internally and sharing them. And yeah, I'm all about whoever. This is where the idea of mastering the best of what other people have figured out um,
Comes from.
comes in. I am not smart enough to sit down and have all these original ideas. Maybe other people are, and I applaud you. And if you are, email me. I'd love to chat with you. I'm not that person. And so, but what I can do is be like, oh, here's an idea. I think that might work here. And what most people do, and this is because I've learned this over the years, because people are like, how do you do that? Well, it's incorrect for this reason and this reason. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. You're trying to figure out if the idea is 100% correct. And the idea is 99% correct, but you can find the 1% that makes it incorrect. So you discount it and you don't use it. And I'm asking myself a completely different question, which is this correct, but is this useful? And that
Hmm.
changes how you look at it. And
Hmm.
when you start asking yourself if it's useful, it's like, in what cases is it useful? Can I use this? Can I apply this? Does it work within a particular ecosystem, or can I pull it out of the ecosystem that it was created and apply it to my ecosystem and have similar results? Wow, this changes everything, because we're so caught up these days in being like, you're wrong for the following reasons, right? And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, those reasons might be right, they might be wrong. Does it matter in the context of, is this useful? Can we use this? Is this a good starting point? Is this a good beachhead that we can launch off of?
Well, and let's just go back to this Munger, right? Who's I mean, he's obviously himself very well known. It's not just Buffett now, right? And it's happened over time. He's been such a successful investor in his own right, and here he is, what I think 99 years old now or something, right? I mean, that's rare too. And this idea that he shares, that what we need to develop worldly wisdom is a lattice work of mental models. That is, and I this that simple phrase has been really useful to me personally, and also in teaching professionally. But I think more so in like my children, and saying, look, eh, there's so many ways to see the world, and the risk is whenever we take a single mental model, don't even know we took it, breathed it in, see everything through that lens, which means that we are missing, the vast majority of the world while we think we are seeing it correctly. And so, it's like, how many mental models can you read? Can you understand? Can you add into that lattice work? And it seems to me Farnam Street has done, I don't know, the best of anybody at this, but like, of just selecting, identifying those different mindsets and writing them very clearly, smoothly, both you and then of course your team that's doing this. And at first you wrote these books. I still have them. I'm going to get them off my shelf to prove this moment. You sent them to me here. This is the Great Mental Models, Volume 1. I have Volume 2, and so on. And what I loved about these books, um, is that this, same as the blog, there's a purity about it in your
Mm,
approach. Where it's like, no, I'm going to do this. It's a kind of less but better approach, we might say. Like, I'm going to do it right. The lure of the crowd, right, which is always there, and we want things to be big, but sometimes people just want to be big, and that's all that matters to them, not quality. And so, you've done it. It's just a terrific job. And I've loved being able to teach my children that idea of, I've shared these books with my children. So they've grown up. I remember having a long conversation with my son, maybe at the time, let's say he was 14, maybe around that time. And I was going through, literally, I shared these books with him, and I identified 100 mental models. And I was just going through one by one with him. And I don't know that he remembers all those mental models, but I know that he had exposure to them. And I know that it's made him, it has taken the postage stamp version of the world that lives inside all of our heads and inside of his head, and it's expanded it. So here he is, he's only 17 now, but his understanding of the complexity of the world is so impressive for a 17-year-old, much more than mine was. And so anyway, I'm just sort of setting all of that up for this aspiration with clear thinking. The book that you've written, as far as I can tell, this is sort of the aspiration. If you can help people improve incrementally the way that they're seeing the world, the way that they're seeing their decisions, then they can improve the output significantly in that way. Your thoughts?
I think you should be in charge of marketing, Greg. This is excellent. I had read a lot of books on thinking, and none of them really made sense to me because most of them get overly academic. They're not practical, and they fail to address the biggest reason that we put ourselves in bad positions, which is circumstances or situations tend to think for us. And so we're not thinking in those moments, like when you're arguing with your partner about loading the dishwasher or whose correct way it is, or whatever silly domestic, sort of disagreement or tiff that you're having. If I tap you on the shoulder in that moment and say, "Hey, Greg, do you want to put water or gas on this?" You're going to be
Mm,
like, water. But the problem is you don't realize what's happening in that moment. And so
mm,
that moment, which is an ordinary moment, tends to move you away from where you want to go, whether it's closer to your partner or closer to your goals. And you have to invest a
mhm,
lot of time and energy and
mhm,
effort to make up for that, right? To reinvest in the
mhm.
relationship, to repair the relationship, to bring yourself back. A little disagreement on a Friday night can take all weekend to sort of bring it back to baseline. And so how do we think about this, and what can we do with this information? And I think the biggest counterintuitive lesson that I learned through studying uh, thousands of people make decisions is the best in the world aren't necessarily smarter than we are. They just put themselves in a better position than we're in. And the the most brilliant person in the world looks like an idiot when they're in a bad position. And an average person can look like a
Mm,
genius when they're in a good position. And
mm.
positioning is largely, not always, but largely within our control. And there's always something that we can do today to improve our position tomorrow. And there's a difference between positioning and predicting. Predicting is, I know I'm going to apply for this job next week, or I know I'm going to have a test next week. And predicting is like a subset of positioning when I actually know what the future looks like. I'm not guessing what the future looks like. I know what the future looks like. Too often, we guess what the future looks like. We predict what the future looks like with uncertainty, and then we go all in on that path. Positioning is assuming that there's lots of multiple paths in the future, and how do we handle ourselves so that we can handle almost all of those paths with ease. And that's what the best in the world do. They're always in a good position. They're almost never forced by circumstances or situation into doing something they don't want to do.
Tell us more about that.
I'll give you an
How does
example.
yeah.
So let me give you an example to bring it home. So I'll use kids because a lot of people have kids. My son came home. He got a really bad mark on his exam. He's 13, so he's like full on teenager. He chucks me his exam, and he's not proud of his mark, and he just looks at me, shrugs his shoulders, and he's like, "I did the best I could." And I was like, "Oh, pause here." And then I was like, "Okay, we'll talk about this later. Like, let's calm down. There's too much emotion here right now to have a good
Mhm,
conversation." And I remember from
mhm.
playing football, most of my teammates quit, and they didn't quit because of their on the field performance. No matter if it
Mm.
was great or poor, they always quit because of the car ride home with their parents.
Wow.
And I remembered that in that moment. And I was like, I'm gonna wait. So he calms down, and then we circle back, and I'm like, let's chat. You said you did your best. I'm not gonna argue with that, but I want you to explain what doing your best means. And he's like, "Well, I sat down at 10 and, I looked at all the questions and I looked at all the points and I allocated my time accordingly and answered the questions to the best of my ability." I'm like, "Oh, okay." You think about doing your best as that moment forward. But pause.
Mhm.
Let's rewind here. Let's rewind 72 hours. Did you study for your test? No. Did you stay up late? Yes. Why'd you stay up late the night before your test? I was cramming. Why were you cramming? 'Cause I didn't study the days before. Okay. Did you have a healthy breakfast? No. Why not? I didn't get up in time to make a healthy breakfast. Okay. Did you fight with your brother the morning of your test? Yes. Why did you fight with your brother? because I woke up late and I was in the bathroom at the same time as him and I was grumpy because I didn't get enough sleep. I'm like, okay. So the position that you were in when you sat down at 10 a.m., was that easy mode or was that hard mode? He's like, that was hard mode. Did you control whether you were playing on easy mode or hard mode? I controlled it. So you chose to play on hard mode. That doesn't mean the test is not going to kick your butt. That's a different sort of, but you can't tell me you did your best when you showed up not doing the things within your control to put yourself in a good position to succeed. Now, let's apply that to life, right? So, like, you can think about investing in your relationship as a form of positioning, back to the spark and whether it lights the grass on fire or not. You are in control, and so often when we address these moments, we're like, how do we have a better conversation with each other? And what we don't think about is like, let's go back to the lead domino here. What's the first thing within our
Mhm.
control that sets us up? It's like we're
Mhm.
trying to intervene at the wrong points. And,
Mhm.
and I just look at the world differently and I think about it differently. And I hope it's useful to some people, but I think there's a lot we can do to put ourselves in a really good position no matter what the future holds. If you go back and you look at Carnegie and you look at Rockefeller and you look at them through this lens, or you look at Berkshire Hathaway and look at it through the lens of positioning, and most of their gains, almost all of them, in fact, are moments where other people are forced by circumstance into doing something they don't want to do. And they can take advantage of the situation because they are positioned in such a way that they can always play offense if they need to.
So that brings to my mind a piece of news, like just right now. So, like a few days ago, at the time of this recording, we have Sam Altman fired from OpenAI, really unexpectedly. I mean, he doesn't expect it, presumably because he's still doing active CEO work up to the very moment. Now, that doesn't mean there's no friction before that moment, but something has come to a head, and suddenly, and he is ousted. And this is, I don't recall, but maybe let's say this is Friday, and this morning at 2 a.m., Satya Nadella at Microsoft announces that they've hired him and Greg to to come and lead the AI research. So Sam is now the CEO of Microsoft's AI research group, and it just reminds me of what you're describing somehow here. That there's something about the way that Satya thinks, and I think he's well worth a deep dive as to how he does think and how different that is than other people and how different that was to Balmer before him, and even Bill before him. But whatever he's doing, it just reminds me of what you're describing with positioning, because he's gone from what looked like a sort of a disaster. I mean, they own 50% of OpenAI. This is a very public firing. It's very unexpected. It's very uncertain to the marketplace. I mean, it's a strange decision, executed in a strange way. And it just reminds me what you're describing here about like being in a position where people felt, well, this is the only thing we can do, and this is the right thing to do, and we just have to do this in this way. And somehow Satya has perspective where he's like, yeah, I think I'll just scoop that up. I'll just scoop up an enormous amount of the value of OpenAI for almost free. Yeah. Anyway, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think Satya is a genius. If anybody can put me in touch with him, I'd love to talk to him. I do think he's taken Microsoft and positioned it very well for the future, no matter which direction the future holds. And he's shown in this case that he was super adaptable. And I think the way that I'm on the board of a public company, and I think the way the board handled this was that's not the way to do it. No matter, I don't know behind the scenes what Sam had what allegedly done or anything, but almost regardless of that, that's not the way to go about what they did, and I think it backfired on them, and I think it much to Microsoft's benefit, and in some ways, perhaps to the world's benefit, we ended up in this situation. Hopefully, time will prove that correct. I'm a huge fan of Sam, and I have a lot of respect for what he's done and the way that he's accomplished it and the team that he's built. And I suspect a large number of the OpenAI team will be joining him at Microsoft.
Yeah, I would think so because they've come out with an open letter asking for the board of OpenAI to resign. And that's an unusual move too. If part of management is not surprising and shocking the people in your organization, so that people can have a sense of continuity. Go ahead, you had a thought there.
Well, it just goes to show you how unpredictable the world is too. Right on Thursday, OpenAI was the clear leader, and now all of a sudden we have an AI race. And I think nobody would have predicted this series of events, and nobody would have gave it a likelihood. And these things happen, and if you're in a position to take advantage of them, then you can gain a huge amount of points, if you will, to go back to the analogy of a game in these situations. And I think that so often we're trying to predict the future, but nobody could have predicted this. I mean, we can predict that this will happen. We can't predict the timeline in which it will happen. Just as we can predict there will be financial crisis in the future, there will be panics, there will be manias, we just don't know when they're coming. And we often think the world's going to warn us and it's going to say, hey, you got 2 weeks, Greg, to go home and get prepared because in 2 weeks, we're going to have a financial crisis. And it's like we expect this little announcement to come across in our head or our phone to go off and one of those emergency warnings, like in 2 weeks, there'll be a financial crisis. Please shore up your Well, the world doesn't work like that. You always
Right.
have to be in a strong position. And the people who operate from a strong position have nothing but good options to choose from. And the people who don't operate from a strong position need a Hail Mary to make everything work.
It's a brilliant use of the term positioning, and it's a brilliant insight into how to operate in a way that you gain predictable future advantage. Because as you already said, right, like as soon as somebody understands enough, right, that their view of the world is complex enough, they know that the unpredictable will happen. That it's so complex that you can expect unexpected things, and a lot of them, and pretty much in perpetuity. And so you stop trying to time the market, let's say, right? You stop trying to wait, just guess exactly what happens tomorrow. And instead you say, well, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I know it's going to be at random. I know it's going to be complex. Therefore, I will prepare. Therefore, I will, put myself, as I think you're using the term positioning in this way, to position myself in an optimal way for whatever happens, whatever is
Yeah.
coming down there. I,
And
I have a, no,
oh,
go ahead.
go
Your
ahead.
thought.
I was
No, no,
going to say
please.
the thing about positioning is it's always the suboptimal strategy in the moment, but it is always
Mm,
the optimal strategy long term. And we're so focused as a society on winning the moment, we lose the decade. And positioning guarantees you success in the decade, but it's always suboptimal in the moment. And that's a really interesting thing for me to think about, and hopefully for your listeners to think about.
This is a marvelous place to end our conversation. Shane Parrish, thanks for being on the podcast.
Greg, thank you so much.
Everybody who's listening now, remember the book is Clear Thinking. You've heard in the last two conversations why this matters. This is something you can take control of in your life. It's not dependent on the circumstances around you. You can improve the way you think to position yourself to be in a higher leverage position, whatever the future holds. What a tremendous advantage that is. What is one thing that you take away from this conversation? What's one thing you can do immediately? And who can you share it with so that this conversation about clear thinking, this conversation with Shane Parrish can continue now that this conversation has come to a close?